My girlfriend said I disgusted her after she saw me during a diabetic emergency. The glucose monitor on my wrist buzzed at 3:47 a.m., pulling me from shallow sleep. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, squinting at the screen through the haze. Blood sugar, 41 mg/dl. The number glowed red, urgent. My hands were already trembling, that familiar weakness spreading through my limbs like ice water in my veins. I reached for the juice box I kept on my side of the bed, but my fingers wouldn't cooperate. The small cardboard container tumbled to the floor, rolling under the bed frame. I tried to call out to Vanessa, but my tongue felt thick, unresponsive. The room tilted sideways. Vanessa stirred beside me, her dark hair spread across the pillow. I managed to tap her shoulder, my hand moving in slow motion. She opened her eyes, annoyed at first, then alarmed when she saw my face. I must have looked bad because she sat up fast, reaching for her phone instead of the emergency glucose tablets in the drawer. She was recording. I could see the red dot on her screen even through my deteriorating vision. My body started convulsing, not violently, but in those uncontrollable tremors that come with severe hypoglycemia. Sweat soaked through my shirt. I heard myself making sounds I didn't recognize, guttural and inhuman. She kept filming. Her face above the phone showed something I'd never seen before, a mixture of fascination and revulsion. She wasn't moving to help me. The glucose tablets were right there in the nightstand drawer, 18 inches from her free hand. I'd shown her a dozen times where I kept emergency supplies. We'd been together for 8 months. She knew about my type 1 diabetes from our second date. I'd explained the risks, the protocols, what to do if this happened, but she just held that phone steady, her hand not shaking at all while mine jerked uselessly against the mattress. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was her thumb moving across the screen, probably adjusting the focus. I woke up in the hospital with an IV in my arm and my older brother Derek sitting in the plastic chair beside the bed. Sunlight streamed through the window, too bright, painful. My head felt like someone had filled it with concrete and broken glass. Derek looked exhausted, his security guard uniform wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. He explained that Vanessa had called 911 eventually, after I'd been seizing for several minutes. The paramedics found me unconscious with a blood sugar of 28. Another 5 minutes, and I might have suffered permanent brain damage or died. Derek had driven straight from his overnight shift when the hospital called him as my emergency contact. Vanessa showed up around noon carrying coffee and wearing makeup that looked freshly applied. She kissed my forehead and asked how I was feeling, her voice dripping with concern that felt performative somehow. Derek excused himself to get food from the cafeteria, but I caught the look he gave her before leaving, something cold and assessing. Vanessa sat on the edge of the hospital bed and took my hand, but her grip felt wrong, too light, like she was touching something contaminated. She started talking about how scary it was, how traumatic for her to watch me like that, how she hadn't slept all night from the stress of it all. I asked her why she didn't give me the glucose tablets. The question came out quiet, not accusatory, just genuinely confused. She let go of my hand and stood up, walking to the window. She said she panicked, that she'd never seen anything like that before, that my face looked wrong and my body was doing things that frightened her. I reminded her we'd discussed this exact scenario multiple times. She turned around and her expression had shifted into something defensive and sharp. She said I didn't understand what it was like to witness someone you love turning into something else, something disturbing and uncontrollable. The word she used was disturbing, not the emergency itself, but me during it. Derek came back with sandwiches, and the conversation stopped. Vanessa stayed for another hour, scrolling through her phone mostly, occasionally looking up to smile at me in that strange, detached way. When she left, she kissed me goodbye on the cheek instead of the lips. Derek waited until her footsteps faded down the hallway before asking if I was okay, really okay. I told him about the glucose tablets, about her filming instead of helping. His jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything, just nodded slowly. He stayed with me until the doctors discharged me that evening, driving me back to the apartment Vanessa and I shared in his beat-up Chevy truck. The apartment felt different when we walked in. Vanessa was curled up on the couch watching some reality show, and she barely looked up when we entered. Derek helped me to the bedroom, making sure I had supplies within reach, checking that my continuous glucose monitor was functioning properly. Before he left, he pulled me aside in the kitchen and told me to be careful. He said something felt off about how Vanessa was acting, that her concern seemed staged. I defended her out of habit, saying she was probably just shaken up. Derek looked at me with that older brother expression that meant he knew I was lying to myself. Over the next week, Vanessa became distant in ways I couldn't quite articulate. She stopped sleeping pressed against me, maintaining a gap of several inches in our bed. She flinched slightly when I tested my blood sugar at the dinner table, that tiny lancet prick on my fingertip making her turn away. She started spending more time at her friend Colette's apartment, coming home late smelling like wine and expensive perfume. When I tried to talk about it, she said I was being paranoid and clingy, that she needed space after the trauma of watching my medical emergency. She made it sound like I'd done something to her, like my diabetic crisis was a personal attack. I found the video on Thursday night. Vanessa had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter, and when I closed it, I accidentally woke the screen. Her Instagram was up, and there in her drafts folder was a video with my face as the thumbnail. My stomach dropped even before I clicked play. The footage was worse than I'd imagined. 23 minutes of me convulsing and sweating and making those inhuman sounds, shot in high definition with perfect lighting from her phone. She'd filmed the whole thing without helping once. The draft caption read, "The reality of dating someone with chronic illness. Sometimes love isn't enough when you're faced with something this disturbing. Be honest with yourself about what you can handle." I felt something break inside my chest, not dramatic or painful, just a quiet fracture. She was going to post it. She was going to turn the worst moment of my life into content for her followers, into a justification for whatever she was planning to do. I sat there staring at that draft for maybe 10 minutes, my mind trying to process the level of betrayal this represented. She'd watched me nearly die and thought about her Instagram engagement. She'd let me suffer because she was too focused on getting good footage. The woman I'd been planning a future with had turned my medical emergency into a social media opportunity. When Vanessa got home around 11, I was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open in front of me. She saw the screen and froze in the doorway, her keys still in her hand. For about 5 seconds, we just stared at each other, and I watched her run through possible explanations in her head, her eyes moving in that calculating way. Then she went with anger instead of excuses. She said I had no right to go through her things, that the laptop was private, that I was violating her privacy and her creative process. Creative process. She called filming my near-death experience a creative process. I asked her why she recorded it instead of helping me. My voice stayed calm somehow, which seemed to throw her off. She'd probably expected me to yell, to give her ammunition to paint me as the bad guy. Instead, I just waited for an answer. She set her purse down slowly and crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe like she was posing for a photo shoot. She said that in the moment, she'd needed to document what was happening, that she'd felt helpless and recording gave her something to do with the panic. I pointed out that giving me glucose tablets would have been something useful to do with the panic. She said I was twisting everything, making her the villain when she'd saved my life by calling 911. I asked about the caption, about posting it to Instagram. She looked at the screen, then back at me, and something in her face hardened. She said she'd been thinking a lot about our relationship over the past week, about whether she could really handle being with someone who had such intense medical needs. She said watching me during the emergency had made her realize things about herself, about her limits. She kept saying limits like it was a reasonable boundary, and not just her being unable to handle basic human compassion. She said the video was her way of processing the experience, and she thought her followers deserved to see the reality of what she was going through as my partner. I closed the laptop carefully and stood up. I told her we were done, that she needed to find somewhere else to stay tonight. She laughed, actually laughed, and said I was being dramatic and immature. She said most people would appreciate having a girlfriend who was honest about the challenges, instead of pretending everything was perfect. I walked to the bedroom and started pulling her clothes out of the closet, piling them on the bed. She followed me, her voice rising, saying I couldn't just kick her out of her own home. I reminded her that the lease was in my name, that she'd moved in 4 months ago but never signed anything or paid rent. She'd been between jobs since we met, allegedly working on her influencer career. Vanessa switched tactics, her voice going soft and wounded. She said she loved me, that she was sorry if the video upset me, that she wouldn't post it if it bothered me that much. She reached for my hand, but I stepped back. I told her I'd seen how she looked at me in that video, the disgust barely hidden behind the concern. I told her I'd noticed the way she flinched away from me now, the way she'd stopped touching me voluntarily. She opened her mouth to deny it, but something in my expression must have stopped her. Instead, she said, maybe I was right. Maybe she couldn't handle this after all. She said it like she was the one breaking up with me, like she was doing me a favor. She packed a bag and called Colette to pick her up. While we waited in hostile silence, she kept looking at her phone, typing furiously, her face illuminated by the blue screen glow. Colette arrived in 20 minutes, pulling up in her white BMW and honking twice. Vanessa grabbed her bag and paused at the door, turning back to look at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. She said I should know that she'd really tried, that it wasn't her fault my condition was too much for her to handle. Then she left, letting the door slam behind her. I stood there in the sudden quiet of the apartment, feeling simultaneously relieved and devastated. I called Derek around midnight. He answered on the second ring, alert despite the late hour. I told him everything, about the video, about Vanessa's plan to post it, about the breakup. He listened without interrupting, then said he'd be over in 15 minutes. He showed up with beer and Chinese takeout, and we sat on my couch eating lo mein straight from the containers while I processed what had just happened. Derek said he'd never liked Vanessa, that she'd always seemed more interested in the idea of me than the reality. He said I deserved someone who wouldn't film me dying for Instagram clout. I barely slept that night, lying in bed alone for the first time in months. I kept checking my phone, half expecting Vanessa to text me, but there was nothing. Around 4 a.m., I checked her Instagram, more out of masochistic curiosity than anything else. She'd posted a story, a photo of herself looking sad and beautiful in Colette's apartment with the caption, "Sometimes loving someone means knowing when to walk away for your own mental health. Choose yourself." The comments were full of her followers supporting her, telling her she was brave, asking what happened. She was already crafting the narrative, making herself the victim. Friday morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls from my mom. She lived 3 states away in Arizona, but somehow always knew when something was wrong. I called her back and she answered immediately, her voice tight with worry. She said Vanessa had posted something on Instagram and several of Mom's friends had sent it to her. My stomach dropped. I opened Instagram with shaking hands, and there it was, the video, posted to Vanessa's main feed with 47,000 followers. She'd edited it down to 8 minutes but kept all the worst parts, my body convulsing, my face contorted, those inhuman sounds. The caption was even worse than the draft. The caption read, "I need to be honest with all of you about something I've been struggling with. My now ex-boyfriend has type 1 diabetes, and watching him have a severe medical emergency completely traumatized me. This video is from that night. I know some of you will judge me for recording it, but in that moment I was paralyzed with fear and didn't know what to do. Seeing someone you love transform into something unrecognizable is horrifying. After a lot of soul-searching, I've realized I can't be with someone whose medical condition triggers such intense fear and disgust in me. I tried to push through those feelings, but they only got stronger. I'm sharing this because I think we need to talk about how chronic illness affects relationships and how it's okay to admit when something is too much for you to handle. Choose your own well-being first. Always." The comments were mostly supportive of her, hundreds of people praising her honesty and bravery. A few people pointed out that she'd filmed me instead of helping, but those comments were drowned out by her defenders saying she was in shock, that people process trauma differently. Some comments were outright cruel, talking about how disturbing I looked in the video, how they understood why she couldn't stay. Several people tagged me. My personal account that had maybe 200 followers, mostly family and old high school friends. My phone started blowing up with notifications. People I barely knew sending me messages ranging from supportive to accusatory. My mom was crying on the phone, asking if I was okay, saying she was going to fly out here and help me sue Vanessa for something, anything. I told her I was fine, which was obviously a lie. Derek called 3 minutes after I hung up with Mom, having seen the post through his girlfriend Simone's Instagram. He was furious, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. He said this was illegal, that you couldn't post someone's medical emergency without consent, that this was harassment or defamation or something. I told him I'd look into it, but honestly I just felt numb. The violation was so complete, so public, that I couldn't fully process it yet. I spent Friday researching lawyers who specialized in privacy law and social media cases. Most of them wanted retainers I couldn't afford on my medical billing specialist salary. One attorney named Ruth Goldstein offered a free consultation, and I met with her Monday morning in her downtown office. Ruth was in her 60s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that had clearly seen every kind of human cruelty. She watched the video once, her expression growing harder with each passing second. When it finished, she looked at me and said this was one of the most clear-cut cases of invasion of privacy she'd seen in years. Ruth explained that posting someone's medical emergency without consent was legally actionable in our state, especially when paired with defamatory statements about disgust and fear. The video showed Vanessa not rendering aid when she clearly could have, which might even constitute negligence or reckless endangerment. Ruth said we could go after her for damages, force her to take down the video, possibly even get punitive damages for the emotional distress and reputational harm. She quoted me a retainer fee that made my chest tight, but offered to take the case on contingency if I couldn't afford upfront costs. She believed in this one, she said. She believed I deserved justice. I signed the papers that afternoon. Ruth filed a cease and desist letter immediately, demanding Vanessa remove the video within 24 hours. She also filed for a temporary restraining order preventing Vanessa from posting any content about me or my medical condition. The legal documents were served to Vanessa at Colette's apartment on Tuesday. According to Ruth's process server, Vanessa had looked shocked when she answered the door, then angry when she read the papers. She'd immediately called someone, probably a lawyer, her voice high and agitated. Ruth said this was good, that panic meant we'd caught her off guard, that she probably thought she'd get away with it. The video came down Wednesday morning, but the damage was done. It had been viewed 340,000 times, shared thousands more, copied and re-uploaded by commentary channels and drama accounts. My face was out there now, my worst moment immortalized across multiple platforms. My personal Instagram had blown up to 3,000 followers, most of them people who'd come from Vanessa's post. The comments on my photos ranged from supportive to mocking. Someone had found my LinkedIn and left a review on my employer's page saying they should fire me before I had a medical emergency at work. My boss called me into her office Thursday to ask if everything was okay, if I needed time off, her face carefully neutral. Vanessa posted a response to her stories on Thursday evening. She was crying in the video, her makeup running artfully, sitting in what looked like Colette's expensive living room. She said she was being legally harassed by her abusive ex-boyfriend who was trying to silence her truth. She said I was weaponizing the legal system to control her narrative and punish her for being honest about her struggles. She said the video was her property, that she had every right to share her own experiences, that I was trying to censor her freedom of speech. Her followers ate it up. sending me hundreds of angry messages calling me an abuser, a manipulator, a monster who was attacking this poor woman for telling her story. Ruth filed the full lawsuit Friday morning. We were suing for invasion of privacy, intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation, and negligence. The complaint detailed how Vanessa had filmed me during a medical crisis instead of rendering easily accessible aid, how she'd posted the video publicly without consent, along with defamatory statements, how she'd caused me severe emotional distress and reputational harm. Ruth attached medical records showing the severity of my hypoglycemic episode, documentation of my employment issues stemming from the video, and a forensic analysis of the Instagram post showing the deliberate nature of her actions. She was asking for $500,000 in damages, plus attorney's fees. The lawsuit went public Monday when the local news picked it up. The story angle was perfect for viral outrage. Influencer films boyfriend's medical emergency for Instagram instead of helping him, gets sued for $500,000. The local news segment was surprisingly balanced, interviewing both Ruth and a legal expert who confirmed this was a serious case with strong merit. They reached out to Vanessa for comment, but she declined, posting instead to her Instagram that she was being crucified for being vulnerable and honest. The news story got picked up nationally by Tuesday, and suddenly my phone was full of interview requests from morning shows and online publications. Ruth advised me to stay quiet publicly until after the trial, but she did arrange one carefully crafted interview with a health advocacy journalist named Patricia Wu. Patricia came to my apartment Wednesday evening and spent 2 hours talking to me about living with type 1 diabetes, about the reality of medical emergencies, about what it felt like to have the worst moment of my life turned into content. She was kind and professional, never pushing too hard, letting me tell my story at my own pace. The article published Friday and was nothing like Vanessa's post. It was compassionate and informative, explaining the seriousness of diabetic emergencies, the legal implications of what Vanessa had done, and the broader issues of consent and exploitation in social media culture. Vanessa's follower count started dropping over the weekend. She'd had 47,000 before the lawsuit, but by Monday morning she was down to 41,000 and falling. Brands that had sponsored her posts started quietly removing her from their partnerships. A skincare company she'd worked with posted a statement saying they didn't condone the exploitation of medical emergencies and had severed ties with her. Each loss seemed to make her more desperate. She posted increasingly unhinged stories claiming I was orchestrating a campaign to destroy her life, that I was paying people to leave negative comments, that I was somehow controlling the narrative through my non-existent media empire. Derek sent me a screenshot Tuesday morning of a post from one of Vanessa's followers, a woman named Jessica, who'd been tagged in a comment exchange. Jessica had written a long post about how she dated Vanessa briefly 2 years ago, before Vanessa had started identifying as straight and dating men for her Instagram aesthetic. Jessica described similar patterns: Vanessa recording intimate or vulnerable moments without consent, using people's private struggles as content, discarding them when they were no longer useful for her brand. Several other people commented with their own stories. A pattern was emerging, and it wasn't flattering. Ruth deposed Vanessa in late October. I wasn't allowed to be present, but Ruth told me afterward that Vanessa had been hostile and uncooperative, contradicting herself repeatedly. When asked why she'd filmed instead of helping, she'd claimed she didn't know where the glucose tablets were, even though the video clearly showed the nightstand within arm's reach. When asked about the caption calling me disturbing and disgusting, she'd said those were her authentic feelings, and she had a right to express them. Ruth said Vanessa's lawyer, a young guy named Scott Brennan, who looked barely out of law school, had visibly winced several times during her testimony. My deposition was harder. I had to sit across from Vanessa and Scott and answer questions about my medical history, about our relationship, about the night of the emergency. Vanessa wouldn't look at me directly, but I could see her jaw clenching every time I spoke. Scott asked invasive questions about my diabetes management, trying to suggest I'd been negligent in my own care, that the emergency was somehow my fault. Ruth objected to most of it, her voice cutting through the conference room like a blade. When Scott asked if I'd ever discussed with Vanessa her discomfort around my medical condition, I told the truth. She'd never mentioned any discomfort until after she'd decided to leave me. She'd had 8 months to tell me if she was struggling. The trial was set for January, but settlement negotiations started in November. Scott reached out to Ruth with an initial offer. Vanessa would issue a public apology and pay $15,000 in damages. Ruth laughed when she told me about it. Actually laughed. She sent back a counter. $450,000, permanent injunction against posting any content about me, mandatory sensitivity training about disability rights, and a public statement taking full responsibility for her actions. Scott said that was absurd. Ruth said then we'd see them in court, and discovery would include subpoenaing all of Vanessa's financial records, all of her private messages about me, and all of her deleted content. Scott called back 2 days later asking if we could meet in the middle. December brought a breakthrough. Ruth's investigator found deleted Instagram stories saved on a data recovery server, messages Vanessa had posted and removed within hours of the original video. In these deleted stories, Vanessa had been far more explicit about her motivations. She'd written about how the video was going to drive huge engagement, how trauma content always went viral, how this might finally get her to 50,000 followers and unlock better sponsorship opportunities. She'd included laughing emojis. The messages also showed her ignoring her friend's suggestions to take the video down, saying she knew what she was doing, that she'd deal with me if I got upset. This was premeditated exploitation, not a trauma response. Scott called for an emergency meeting when Ruth sent over the recovered stories. We met in a conference room at Ruth's firm on a Friday afternoon. Vanessa showed up looking smaller than I remembered, her usual confidence deflated. Scott laid out a new settlement offer, $275,000, permanent content injunction, formal apology, and mandatory training. Vanessa would also be required to cooperate with social media platforms to remove all copies of the video and issue copyright strikes to anyone who'd re-uploaded it. In exchange, I would agree not to pursue criminal charges for negligence or reckless endangerment. Ruth looked at me, and I nodded. Scott drew up the papers right there. Vanessa signed the settlement agreement with visible anger, her hand shaking slightly as she wrote her name. The formal apology was posted to her Instagram the next morning, carefully worded by Scott, but devastating nonetheless. She admitted to filming me during a medical emergency instead of providing easily accessible aid. She acknowledged that posting the video without my consent was a serious violation of my privacy and dignity. She stated that her actions had caused me significant harm and that she took full responsibility. She announced she was taking an indefinite break from social media to reflect on her behavior and complete mandatory training. The post comments were disabled, but the damage to her remaining credibility was complete. The money hit my account in 3 installments over the next month. I used the first payment to cover Ruth's contingency percentage and my medical bills from the emergency. The second payment went into savings, a buffer I'd never had before against future medical costs. The third payment I split between a donation to the Diabetes Research Foundation and a down payment on a small house Derek had found for me, a 2-bedroom place with a yard in a quiet neighborhood 20 minutes from work. Derek helped me move in on a Saturday in late January, and for the first time in almost a year, I felt like I could breathe properly. Vanessa's Instagram account was deleted in February. According to Colette's public posts, Vanessa had moved back in with her parents in Ohio and was working at her father's insurance office. The mandatory sensitivity training had apparently been eye-opening, or so Colette claimed in a post that felt like damage control for her own reputation. Several of Vanessa's former followers had started calling Colette complicit for housing and supporting her during the whole ordeal. Colette was trying to distance herself, claiming she'd told Vanessa to take the video down immediately, that she'd disagreed with the whole thing. I didn't care enough to follow up on whether that was true. I started dating again in March, taking it slow. I met Lauren at a diabetes support group that Derek had convinced me to try. She was a nurse at Children's Hospital, diagnosed with type 1 at age 7, and she understood in ways Vanessa never could have. On our third date, I told her everything about the emergency and the lawsuit. She listened quietly, then asked if I'd let her see where I kept my emergency supplies. We went through my management routine together, her asking questions not out of fear but genuine interest in keeping me safe. When she kissed me goodnight, I didn't see any disgust in her eyes, just warmth and understanding, and something that might become love if I let it. The legal closure came with the final settlement payment, but the emotional closure took longer. I still sometimes woke up anxious, checking my glucose levels obsessively, worried about being vulnerable in front of anyone. Therapy helped, weekly sessions with a counselor who specialized in medical trauma and betrayal. She helped me understand that what Vanessa had done wasn't about my diabetes or my body during the emergency. It was about her complete lack of empathy, her willingness to exploit someone's suffering for personal gain. My medical condition hadn't made me unlovable. It had just revealed who Vanessa really was, underneath the carefully curated Instagram persona. By summer, I'd stopped checking Vanessa's digital footprint. I'd blocked her on everything, asked friends not to mention her, moved forward with my life in ways that didn't include her at all. Lauren and I were serious now, talking about moving in together, planning a future that felt stable and real. Derek had gotten engaged to Simone and asked me to be his best man. My mom visited for a week and cried happy tears when she met Lauren, when she saw that I was genuinely okay, maybe better than okay. I'd found work-life balance, better diabetes management through a new endocrinologist, and a support system that actually supported instead of exploited. The house felt like home now, filled with photos and memories that had nothing to do with Vanessa. I'd framed the article Patricia Wu had written, hanging it in my home office as a reminder that my story was mine to tell, not something for others to steal and distort. Ruth sent me a card when the case officially closed, congratulating me on my strength throughout the legal process. She said most people in my position wouldn't have fought back, would have let themselves be victimized and silenced. I'd chosen differently, and that choice had consequences beyond my own healing. The lawsuit had set a precedent in our state about social media consent and medical privacy. Other attorneys were citing our case in similar situations. I ran into Colette at a grocery store in September. She looked uncomfortable, shifting her weight from foot to foot, clearly wanting to escape. I kept my tone neutral and asked how she was doing. She said fine, then blurted out that Vanessa was engaged now, that she'd found someone in Ohio who understood her. I said I hoped that person knew what they were getting into. Colette flinched but nodded. Before leaving, she said she was sorry for not speaking up during everything, that she'd known what Vanessa was doing was wrong, but hadn't wanted to get involved. I told her that was her choice to live with, not mine to forgive or condemn. She left quickly after that. Lauren moved into the house in October. She brought her diabetes supplies and merged them with mine, and we set up a dedicated medical station in the bedroom with everything we both might need in an emergency. She showed me her medical alert system, and I showed her mine, and we practiced emergency protocols together like other couples might practice fire drills. It should have felt clinical or scary, but instead, it felt safe. We were two people who understood vulnerability and chose to care for each other anyway. She'd seen me through several minor low blood sugar episodes by now, responding with quick efficiency and gentle concern, never once making me feel like a burden or something disturbing. The final piece of closure came in November, when I got a notification that someone had tried to access my Instagram account from an IP address in Ohio. The attempt had failed because of my two-factor authentication, but I knew it was Vanessa. She was checking in, seeing what I was posting, maybe looking for something she could use or some way back into my life. I didn't feel angry or scared. I just felt sorry for her, for someone so trapped in their need for attention and validation that they couldn't let go even a year later. I changed all my passwords, updated my privacy settings one more time, and then deleted the notification. She didn't deserve any more of my energy or attention. Derek's wedding was beautiful. I stood beside him at the altar and watched him promise forever to Simone, and I believed in forever again in ways I hadn't after Vanessa. Lauren sat in the second row looking stunning in a blue dress, and when she caught my eye during the ceremony, she smiled like I was the only person in the room. At the reception, Derek gave a speech thanking everyone who'd supported him and Simone, but he made a point of thanking me specifically for showing him what real strength looked like during my hardest year. People who knew the story nodded. People who didn't ask questions later, and I found I could tell them what happened without feeling diminished by it. Really appreciate you watching until the end. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. There's a lot more coming your way.